Under the scorching sun, a dusty auction shed buzzed with ranchers and curious bystanders. They usually came for cattle or horses, but today's lot was a battered German shepherd named Atlas, his scars and hollow stare making everyone uneasy the moment he stepped into the ring. He lay on a rubber mat near a small podium, immobilized by exhaustion or resignation. His coat was patchy, revealing cuts both healed and fresh. The usual chatter that preceded each auction item quieted the moment Atlas was let in. It was as if everyone sensed the raw tension radiating from him. An auctioneer adjusted his microphone, beads of sweat on his forehead. "Lot 54, he announced, forcing a tone of forced brightness. Male German shepherd, about 5 years old, said to have served, in a military capacity. He cleared his throat, leafing through a folder. There's a waiver for the buyer to sign. Dog is considered unpredictable. Starting bid is... He paused, scanning the small crowd. $30. No one moved. A low rumble of disapproval passed among the onlookers. Several had gotten a closer look at Atlas before the event started. They saw the savage scarring on his muzzle and the nervous quivering of his back legs. Whispers of, "He's trouble," or "Just put him down," trickled through the crowd. Near the back row stood Emmett Vaughn, a 29-year-old former Army medic. He wore a faded green field jacket despite the heat and kept a hand tucked into the pocket to hide nervous fidgeting. His angular face betrayed little emotion, but the tension in his shoulders was a clear sign of an invisible war raging inside him. Emmett never intended to be here. He'd come for tractor parts, noticing only by accident that an ex-military K9 would be auctioned that same day. The words triggered an uneasy pull in his chest, the same kind of feeling that told him he couldn't simply ignore a situation gone wrong. $30, repeated the auctioneer. The silence persisted. Atlas seemed beyond caring. His ears twitched at the sound of a snapping camera shutter, or the slam of a distant car door. But otherwise, he gazed at the dusty concrete as though nothing mattered. "All right, folks," the auctioneer tried once more. "Any takers?" A derisive snort came from a heavy-set rancher in the corner. "I'd be doing the fella a favor by not buying him." A murmur of agreement rippled through the dozen people in attendance. Emmett's heartbeat thudded in his ears. He saw a version of himself in that dog's hollow stare, the same haunted eyes he spotted in the mirror each morning, remembering things he'd seen and done, memories that didn't simply fade the way people said they would. As the crowd's murmurs rose again, Emmett felt a sudden, fierce compulsion, like a moral snap inside him that insisted he act. "I'll take him," he said, stepping forward. A hush blanketed the shed. A wiry man in a denim jacket turned around, eyebrows raised. Two older ladies at the side shared a skeptical glance. Even the auctioneer seemed momentarily taken aback. "Going once, going twice." "Sold to the gentleman in the army jacket," the auctioneer finished, almost relieved that someone had broken the tension. Emmett moved up to the podium, his breathing shallow. The clerk handed him forms on a clipboard, and he automatically scribbled his name on each line. One form was a liability waiver. Another was a quick release statement from the local pound. A final one authorized immediate transfer of ownership for a dangerous or otherwise unadoptable animal. The official cost was $30 plus a minimal auction fee, so Emmett fished out the cash and handed it over. "Friend," the clerk muttered, voice low, "if you change your mind, no one here will blame you." Emmett swallowed, glancing at Atlas. The dog still hadn't lifted his head, but the tension in his flank muscles told him Atlas was well aware of the slightest movement around him. "I'm not changing my mind," Emmett said. "All right," the clerk said with a brief nod. "He's yours." Atlas was led forward by a staff member wearing thick leather gloves and gripping a short, heavy leash. The dog's approach was slow, as if every joint hurt. Emmett noted the ragged scarring near Atlas's front leg. Old bullet wound? Or something worse? He'd seen such injuries in forward operating bases. He'd also seen dogs who'd had their spirits systematically broken until they responded only to aggression. He tried to breathe away the anger that began simmering under his ribs. "Careful," warned the staff member, offering Emmett the leash with an outstretched arm. "He snapped at people. Doesn't like to be touched." Emmett took hold of the leash. He dropped to one knee, ignoring the swirl of dust around him. "Hey, buddy," he murmured. Atlas's ears flickered, but his body language remained rigid. "We'll get through this." The dog's eyes lifted, dark and guarded. It was like staring into a well with no bottom. Emmett's voice caught in his throat. For the first time in years, he felt something akin to hope. An instinct that maybe saving this dog could be a step toward saving himself, too. A hush followed them as Emmett walked Atlas toward his aging pickup. Both man and dog were cautious around each other. Cautious, but strangely accepting. The crowd parted. More curious onlookers than before, but nobody uttered a word to stop him. When they reached the truck, Atlas balked. The open tailgate looked like a trap. Emmett tried to coax him inside, but the dog stared at the dark interior of the bed and refused to budge, muscles trembling. Emmett sighed, understanding the fear of dark enclosed spaces only too well. Instead, he opened the passenger door. Clearing the seat of his jacket and the few tools scattered there, he tugged gently. Atlas stiffened, a low rumble in his throat as though warning Emmett not to rush it. Emmett didn't scold. He waited, giving the leash just enough slack to let Atlas make the decision. When at last the German Shepherd placed his front paws on the passenger seat, Emmett exhaled in quiet relief. Soon Atlas was up in the cab, pressed against the door, eyes never leaving Emmett's every move. Emmett closed the door softly and circled around to the driver's side. He started the truck, and they pulled out onto the highway. The new day for both of them began with a swirl of dust in the rearview mirror. Emmett kept glancing at Atlas as they drove away from the auction. "We'll figure this out," he said out loud, hoping to convey at least an ounce of comfort. But deep down, he was terrified. Terrified he might fail Atlas the way he felt he had failed in the army. And terrified that if this dog was too far gone, it would break the last bit of faith he had in himself. They passed the sign that read, "Thank you for visiting the Helmsley Auction Center," neither man nor dog looking back. Behind them, a few curious souls remained in the parking lot, already speculating about what would happen next, never guessing that the simple exchange of $30 would set off a chain of events that would shake the entire town and heal wounds nobody realized they were carrying. Emmett's ranch wasn't much to look at, occupying 30 acres of hard, wind-whipped prairie on the outskirts of the small town of Elmswood. Once a thriving property owned by his maternal grandfather, it had fallen into disrepair as Emmett's father struggled to keep it afloat. In Emmett's youth, it had served as a place of summer respite, a place of green grass, old barn cats, and the smell of fresh alfalfa. Now, a few years after returning from his final deployment, Emmett inhabited the ranch alone, scraping by on a modest disability check and the occasional gig repairing farm equipment. He steered his pickup through a wooden gate, wheels bumping over rough gravel. To his right, the skeleton of an old barn leaned precariously, missing boards and half collapsed from a storm that had ripped through the region 2 summers ago. A single strip of farmland out back was overgrown with weeds. Emmett cut the engine in front of the small single-story house that had once been painted white, but now peeled in wide strips. Atlas's ears went up, scanning the environment with a quiet alertness. No more trace of the helpless posture from the auction. Clearly, in open air, the dog's instincts sharpened. His muzzle hovered near the partially open window, nose twitching as he caught the scents of this new place. Emmett turned to him. "This is home," he said, voice raspy from lack of sleep and a coil of nerves in his gut. "Our home if you want it to be." He tried to exit quietly, but Atlas lunged for the door the moment it cracked open. Not aggressively, more like panic pushing him to escape. Emmett managed to block the push without getting bitten. The dog's eyes flared with alarm, and he bared teeth in a silent snarl. Emmett felt a flicker of dread, but he kept his voice even. "Easy," he said softly, placing his palm against the door to keep it from swinging wide. "We'll do this slow." Atlas's sides heaved. He looked away, a half lift of his lip, clearly spooked. Emmett backed off, giving him space to hop down from the passenger side on his own. Eventually, Atlas jumped out. Head low, tail rigid, scanning for threats. He sniffed at the dirt, ears rotating like radar dishes. Emmett took a slow breath. This was going to be a steep climb. Step by step, they approached the front porch. Atlas resisted going inside as if expecting a trap. Emmett recalled how, in the Army, some specialized dogs were trained to detect hidden compartments or contraband, rewarded with treats but also disciplined harshly if they failed. The memory triggered an ache behind his eyes. He had seen dogs that were given so little time to decompress after deployments. He'd read stories about others sold off or put to sleep. The next wave of anger surprised him with its heat. Pushing that aside, he reached for the screen door. "We'll keep it open," he said, voice hushed as though speaking to a frightened child. "No closed doors unless you want them closed." Inside, the house smelled faintly of old coffee and dusty upholstery. A battered sofa sat angled near the front window. A sagging recliner faced a small TV set. He guided Atlas around the living room, giving the dog a chance to explore. Each step squeaked on the old hardwood floors. Atlas's nails clicked in an uncertain rhythm. At one point, Emmett moved too fast and accidentally brushed the dog's back. Atlas whirled, a flash of teeth, but Emmett carefully withdrew his hand. "You're safe," Emmett told him. "I promise I won't hurt you." He wasn't sure if he believed his own words. It wasn't that Emmett intended harm, but deep inside he questioned everything about himself these days. Despite those doubts, he knew compassion was his only shot here. When Atlas showed interest in the open door leading to a back porch, Emmett let him wander. The porch connected to a small fenced yard, which extended into the rest of the property. Atlas ventured out slowly. Emmett followed at a distance, thinking about dog-related essentials he didn't have. A bed, proper food bowls, a first aid kit for animals. He had so much to learn. The breeze ruffled the weeds in the backyard, stirring old memories for Emmett. He remembered nights overseas when the wind carried traces of sand and cordite, and how the restless watchdogs in the forward base would bark at every shift in the air. The memory of that acrid smell made his throat tighten. He forced the feeling away, turning his attention back to Atlas. The German Shepherd was sniffing an overturned wheelbarrow near a weathered post. A sudden sound of squeaking metal, probably a loose hinge, made him jerk back, hackles raised. Emmett noticed how the dog's hind legs shook, like he might lunge or flee. But then Atlas forced himself still, letting out a low whine instead. Emmett could almost read the dog's mind. "Everything is dangerous here, even my own shadow." He recognized the feeling because he lived it too. Nights when a car backfiring down the road made him drop to the floor, heart hammering, reliving what it felt like to sprint under gunfire. The same sense of never being safe. Stepping closer, Emmett offered quiet reassurance. "We'll take this day by day, all right? If I can figure out how to fix myself, maybe I can figure out how to help you." Atlas shot him a look that was neither friendly nor hostile, but it lingered. Emmett felt it like a question. "Are you going to fail me?" He had no answer beyond, "I'll do my best." By dusk, they'd established an uneasy truce. Emmett placed a bowl of water on the porch, and Atlas drank cautiously. He refused the dry dog food Emmett found in the cupboard, left behind by an acquaintance who used to keep a hunting dog on the property. Atlas retreated to a patch of grass in the yard, lying with his chin on his paws, gaze flicking to Emmett every so often. A tractor rumbled in the distance. Emmett wondered if he should tie Atlas up for the night. But everything about tethering or confining the dog felt wrong. Instead, he set out a blanket near the open porch, giving him partial shelter. He decided to leave the door half open, so Atlas could come inside if he chose. Then he settled on a deck chair with a battered cushion. The sky overhead turned lavender and gray, with the hum of crickets resonating across the empty fields. He watched the silhouette of Atlas remain motionless as the sun sank. Memories encroached. the ugly ones filled with blood and screams. He couldn't lock them away as he used to, so he stared at the dog, Atlas, who was likely grappling with his own nightmares. The thought tethered Emmett to reality. If he could stay calm for Atlas's sake, maybe he wouldn't slide backward into those old horrors. It was a fragile anchor, but an anchor nonetheless. Sometime past midnight, Emmett noticed Atlas standing at the edge of the yard, fixated on something in the darkness. A coyote's wail rose in the distance, and the dog let out a thunderous bark that echoed across the stillness. Emmett rushed to see if Atlas was all right, but the bark subsided into a trembling hush. No aggression, just fear. And just like that, Emmett saw a reflection of himself. An ex-soldier who woke screaming in the night at half-remembered threats. He knelt a few yards away from the dog, not approaching too close. "We're both jumpy at ghosts," Emmett murmured into the emptiness. Atlas breathed hard, a faint tremor in his shoulders. For a moment, they locked eyes, briefly bridging the gap between what they'd been told to be unbreakable, unstoppable, and what they truly were, wounded, uncertain, but not yet defeated. The next morning, Emmett was awakened by a gentle knock at the front door. He'd dozed off in the living room, only half sleeping on a sofa that had seen better days. Disoriented, he sat up with a groan, noticing Atlas was nowhere in sight. The dog hadn't ventured inside after all. As Emmett opened the door, he found Alyssa Chen standing on his porch. She was a local veterinarian about his age. He'd met her once or twice when helping fix equipment at the animal clinic. Her dark hair was pinned back in a ponytail, and she carried a small medical tote. "Hey, Doc," Emmett said, blinking in the bright morning light. "Didn't realize you made house calls." Alyssa offered a friendly smile. "Morning. I heard a rumor at the feed store that you purchased an ex-military dog at the auction. Thought I'd swing by to see if you need help." Emmett's shoulders tensed a little, uncertain how he felt about news traveling so fast. But in a small town, word spread with the wind. "I might," he admitted. "He's not in the best shape." She nodded, scanning the yard. "Where is he?" Emmett stepped aside so she could see Atlas pacing along the fence line about 40 feet away, ears up. The dog noticed them watching and halted, tail stiff. "He's cautious," Emmett explained. "Seems to hate small spaces. Doesn't like being touched either." "Military trauma is no joke for dogs," Alyssa said. "I've seen a few come back with emotional scars you wouldn't believe. Some bounce back, some don't. But it's worth trying." Emmett gestured for her to enter. "Sure, but don't expect him to be friendly." They moved out to the porch. Emmett kept a calm demeanor, calling Atlas's name once. The dog didn't approach, just continued sizing up Alyssa from a distance. She crouched in a practiced pose, bag at her side, eyes averted, giving the dog a non-threatening posture. "Let's give him a minute," she whispered. "No sudden moves." They waited, silent except for the hush of the wind and the chirping of meadowlarks beyond the fence. Little by little, Atlas edged closer, drawn by curiosity. After a few long minutes, he got within 10 feet, nose twitching. Alyssa slowly removed a treat from her pocket, smelling strongly of liver, and placed it on the ground at her feet. Then she leaned away, not making eye contact. Atlas watched every movement, muscles coiled. Eventually, he took a step, then another, until he grabbed the treat and retreated to a safer distance. "Progress," Alyssa said under her breath, smiling. Watching their cautious exchange, Emmett felt a twinge of relief. Maybe, with professional guidance, Atlas stood a chance of learning to trust again. And maybe Emmett could too, though a small voice in his head told him he had far fewer excuses than the dog for not seeking help. Alyssa spent the next hour casually talking to Emmett about how the clinic worked with traumatized animals, though mostly horses from abusive homes or ex-fighting pit bulls. She explained she'd never personally handled a retired military K9 who had gone entirely off-grid. "Officially," she said, "they're supposed to be retired to specialized adoption agencies if they can't be redeployed. I'd love to know how he ended up on the open auction block. That's usually not allowed." Emmett shrugged. I guess rules get bent when no one's looking. Maybe he slipped through the cracks, or maybe someone wanted him gone quietly. Hard to say. Alyssa's brow creased. If you like, I could file for more information under the War Dog Adoption Act. Sometimes these records can be made public if a dog's adoptive family requests them. He felt a flicker of unease at the idea of tangling with government records or the possibility that men in suits would come knocking. But a bigger part of him wanted to know the truth. "Sure," he said. "Let's do it." She gave a nod, then glanced at Atlas, who was now prowling near the barn. If it helps unravel what happened to him, it's worth it. Before leaving, Alyssa insisted on doing a basic once-over of Atlas from a distance, checking how he stood, how he moved. She noted how he seemed to favor his right rear leg. Might be a lingering injury, maybe from an old bullet wound, she mused, scribbling notes on a pad. Or some kind of shrapnel. Hard to be sure without x-rays. Emmett eyed the dog's stance, which radiated tension. "Let's give him a few days to settle before we try anything more invasive." She agreed, passing along a packet of professional-grade dog food samples to see if that would coax the dog's appetite. Then she departed, promising she'd look into the official records. As her red SUV rumbled off, a hush settled over the property again. Emmett rummaged through the sample packs, mixing some with warm water. Holding it in a bowl, he walked slowly toward Atlas, who watched from a cautious distance. It took a good 10 minutes for Emmett to set the bowl down and step back far enough that Atlas dared come forward. The dog sniffed the food, hesitated, then began to eat. Relief blossomed in Emmett's chest. At least he was eating now. He sank onto a tree stump near the fence, letting out a heavy breath. The tension from sleepless nights and constant vigilance pressed into his skull. He knew Atlas wasn't the only one who needed therapy. He was coping with his own nightmares, but for some reason, focusing on the dog gave him a sense of purpose. If he was busy saving Atlas from darkness, maybe he could stave off his own for a while longer. Later that day, after running a few necessary errands, Emmett spent the afternoon clearing debris in the yard to make it safer for Atlas. He removed nails from scattered planks, threw away broken buckets, and hammered loose boards on the fence. All the while, Atlas slunk around, never straying too close, but never letting Emmett out of sight. By evening, Emmett was bone-tired, but oddly calmer than he'd felt in months. He found Atlas lying in a patch of sun near the porch, still trembling occasionally at passing vehicles or unexpected noises, but no longer frantic. Emmett eased himself down, legs crossed a good 6 feet away, and began talking softly. "I used to be a medic," he said, voice carrying into the open air. "I saw things that still wake me up at night. I guess that's why I can't just see you as some vicious dog. I know how easy it is to be labeled broken by the people who don't want to understand." Atlas's ears twitched. He was listening. Emmett continued, exhaling slowly. "You and me, we survived things that normal folks can't imagine. That means we're stuck with nightmares and scars. But I don't want to give up. I hope you don't either." The dog's gaze flicked over to Emmett. No tail wag, no relaxation. But the quiet acceptance that lingered in his eyes gave Emmett a small spark of confidence. They were allies, at least in some unspoken way. He got up and headed inside, leaving the door open again. A few hours later, during a particularly sharp gust of wind, Emmett heard cautious footsteps on the porch. Atlas appeared in the doorway, didn't enter, but looked inside as though weighing his options. Emmett, from his seat at the kitchen table, lifted his gaze. "You're welcome here," he said simply. The dog stared, then padded back into the night, but the fact Atlas had even considered stepping into the house felt like a victory. Emmett rubbed at the tension in his neck and resumed going through the forms Alyssa had given him. Some were standard veterinary release forms, others were disclaimers about potentially dangerous animals, and one detailed how to request official records of a retired military working dog service. He sighed, pulling out a pen. Before he began, he noticed his hand was shaking. It was that old anxiety creeping up again, the one that made him dread official channels or bureaucratic processes, always worried about what might come to light. But he filled them out, signing his name with a slow exhalation, because for the first time in a while there was something he wanted more than to avoid the past. He wanted answers for Atlas. He wanted to do right by this dog that no one else saw value in. Once finished, he set the pen aside. Outside, the stars pressed close against the inky sky, filling the windows with a peaceful hush. Emmett found himself thinking, maybe this is my chance to rewrite how I view myself, to be more than the soldier who came home messed up. Atlas was giving him that chance. Now all he had to do was not blow it. By the end of the week, Atlas had made incremental progress. He tolerated Alyssa within a 5-foot radius and let Emmett place food nearer and nearer to him each meal. Sometimes he would sniff Emmett's outstretched fingers before turning away. Emmett considered that a major win. But the dog's nightmares persisted. Late at night, Atlas would pace the yard or bark at seemingly nothing, often trembling as if wrestling with ghosts. One afternoon, Emmett received a call from Alyssa. "I reached out for those records," she said, her tone edged with concern. "There's a partial file, but they're reluctant to release the rest. Something about a special operations classification. They gave me a short summary. Atlas was part of a specialized canine unit overseas. No official medical discharge was recorded. Looks like he was simply removed from the roster." Emmett frowned. "Sounds shady." "It does. I've asked a friend who works with a military dog rescue group to dig deeper, but it might take time. In the meantime, how is he?" "He's surviving," Emmett replied. "I can't get near enough to do a real exam on him, but he's calmer. Still spooked, though." Alyssa hesitated on the line, then said, "There's something else. A friend of mine used to handle dogs that came back stateside. She said it's not uncommon for them to be auctioned under fake IDs, especially if they fail certain reactivity tests. Some unscrupulous folks just want to wash their hands of them. If Atlas has special ops history, maybe he saw or did things that made him unmanageable. But that's not his fault." Emmett thanked her for the update. When he hung up, his mind churned. He'd known the system was flawed. The Army often turned a blind eye when certain units wanted inconvenient issues to disappear. But this dog had saved lives once, or so Emmett guessed. It didn't sit right that Atlas was now labeled worthless. Late that afternoon, while tinkering with his father's old tractor in the barn, Emmett noticed a white pickup kicking up dust on the gravel driveway. He straightened, wiping sweat and grease off his brow with a rag, and felt his muscles tense. Outsiders rarely visited without calling first. Alyssa was the exception. He hoped it wasn't trouble. Stepping out of the barn, he saw 2 men emerge from the truck. One wore a crisp button-down shirt and slacks, the other jeans and a jacket. The second man had the posture and bearing of someone used to giving orders. They approached, scanning the property. Atlas prowled along the fence line, warily observing. "Can I help you?" Emmett called, crossing his arms. "Are you Emmett Vaughn?" asked the man in the dress shirt. His voice was polite but forced. "We heard you acquired a German Shepherd from the Helmsley auction." Emmett's jaw tightened. "Yes. And who are you?" The man reached into his back pocket and offered a plain business card. It read, Redstone K9 Security Services. No official government title, just a security contractor. "Name's Paul Remington," the man said. "We're looking to retrieve that dog as there's a claim he belongs to us. We understand he was incorrectly listed in the auction." Emmett's grip on the card tightened. "That dog is legally mine now. I paid for him, signed all the papers. If you have an issue, talk to the auction house." His companion, the one wearing the jacket, stepped forward. His eyes flicked to Atlas. "We can compensate you. If you're set on the purchase price, we'll double or triple it, but we need the dog back." Emmett suppressed a shiver. The tone was just too calm, like a rehearsed script. "Thanks, but no thanks," he said. "He's not going anywhere." Remington's eyes narrowed. "I advise you to reconsider. This is a matter of security. The dog underwent specialized training. He's unstable." A silent snarl of anger built in Emmett's chest. "Funny you use that word," he said. "I've spent a week with him. He's no threat unless provoked, and he was clearly abused. If you or your company had any regard for him, you wouldn't have sold him for scraps at an auction." The second man, taller and broader, took a step forward, his expression turning cold. "You don't know what you're dealing with." Emmett felt a spike of adrenaline. He kept his stance steady, shoulders squared. "If you think I'm handing him over, you're mistaken." They stared each other down, tension simmering in the midday heat. Eventually, Remington put a hand on his associate's arm, pulling him back. "We'll be in touch," he said quietly, turning to leave. As the men climbed back into their pickup and drove away, Emmett's heart thumped uncomfortably. He watched the dust settle, mind racing. Why did these people want Atlas so badly? If the dog truly was worthless, they wouldn't show up with an open checkbook. Something bigger was going on. He glanced at Atlas, who stood behind the fence, hackles raised. Even from a distance, Emmett could see the dog's chest heaving. The presence of those men had stirred something dark. Past associations, perhaps. Emmett approached carefully, speaking in a low voice through the fence wires. "They're gone," he assured Atlas, though his own nerves thrummed with unease. "I won't let them take you." Atlas let out a sharp bark, then paced back and forth. Emmett recognized it as agitation, maybe even fear. He tried to project calm, but inside, questions spiraled. What if they come back with paperwork? What if they claim the dog under some special directive? Could I be forced to give him up? He felt a pang, surprising in its intensity. He'd only known Atlas for a short time, but the idea of losing him made Emmett's stomach twist. It wasn't just about saving a dog anymore. It was about protecting a fellow soldier in a sense. "Don't worry," he said, though it was as much for himself as for Atlas. "We'll figure it out." Their immediate defense would be the local sheriff, an ex-Marine who might sympathize. But these men seemed the type who operated outside small-town law enforcement, possibly with federal or private industry ties. And if that was the case, Emmett suspected they wouldn't hesitate to bypass normal legal channels. Returning to the barn, he closed up his tools, though his hands still shook. He reminded himself to breathe. He'd stand his ground, do what needed doing. He had some phone calls to make, starting with Alyssa, who might have resources for legal or rescue-based protections. Stepping out into the fading afternoon light, Emmett caught sight of Atlas in the yard. The dog held his gaze for a few seconds. Strangely, Emmett could almost feel the echo of solidarity. "We've both been in fights we didn't sign up for. No one else was going to stand for them now if they didn't stand for each other." 2 days passed with no sign of the men from Redstone K9 Security Services. Emmett took advantage of the lull to consult with Alyssa, who arranged a discreet meeting with a friend named Dr. Rafael Moreno, another veterinarian but also a legal advocate for working animals. They gathered in Emmett's small kitchen, accompanied by the subdued light of a single overhead fixture. Atlas was outside, prowling within earshot but refusing to come indoors with strangers present. Raphael was in his 50s, with silver at his temples and a soft-spoken manner. He laid out a folder on Emmett's worn table. "If this dog was truly in a specialized unit," he began, "then he could be subject to certain regulations about classified training. But it's rare that they'd forcibly reclaim him unless they believe he has sensitive knowledge. More likely they're worried about liability, afraid you'll reveal something that could get them in trouble." Alyssa frowned. "You think the facility or contractor might have broken the law with their training methods?" Raphael tapped the papers. "I've seen it before. Some private companies push canines beyond ethical or even legal standards. If the dog is traumatized or physically injured under their watch, they'd want to cover it up. Selling him quietly at an auction would be one way to make him vanish, but apparently word got out that someone purchased him." Emmett felt a chill. He remembered the scars, the repeated flinching whenever Atlas saw certain objects, especially thick ropes or leashes that looked like restraints. He's showing signs of extreme stress, that's for sure. Are you set on keeping him? Raphael asked pointedly. Yes, Emmett said, trying to hide a flash of anger. Who else will take him if not me? And if those people get him back, I don't think he'll live long. Alyssa placed a gentle hand on his forearm. We're not suggesting you give him up. We just need to prepare. Legally, you have a valid sale contract, but if Redstone tries to claim him on national security grounds, it might get complicated. Raphael pulled out a stack of documents. Here are steps we can take. File a protective hold in the county, stating you are fostering a dog under potential cruelty investigation. If we can prove he was abused, it's another shield against forced repossession. Also, I've drafted a request to the local sheriff's department for extra vigilance. If anything suspicious happens, you can call them immediately. Emmett nodded. Gratitude and dread churned together inside him. At least he wasn't alone. When the vets finished, Emmett walked them out. Alyssa briefly tried approaching Atlas again, offering a gentle greeting from a safe distance. The dog watched her, muzzle twitching, but still wouldn't close the space. He'll come around, she said with a shrug. He's already miles better than he was before. Keep me updated. They drove off, leaving Emmett in the hush of twilight. He considered the folder of legal forms, the newly minted protective hold. It felt strange. On the one hand, the dog was physically his property, purchased legally. On the other hand, the entire scenario reeked of cover-ups and shady dealings. That evening, he made good on an earlier decision and phoned Sheriff Tanner Wilcox, a man with a trim mustache and a no-nonsense style. Tanner had served in the Marines for 20 years. Emmett gave him the short version. Bought an ex-military dog at auction. Some private contractor tried claiming it. They seemed aggressive about it. Tanner listened, humming in disapproval. I'll keep a patrol aware, he promised. Let me know if they return. If they're stepping on your rights, we'll have a conversation. It was a small measure of assurance. Still, Emmett locked every door and window that night, double-checking the yard for vantage points. He disliked living with this sense of threat, but if his experiences overseas taught him anything, it was that ignoring small warning signs could lead to bigger disasters. Atlas paced restlessly, mirroring Emmett's tension. Around midnight, they heard a series of pops echo across the fields, likely distant fireworks or a neighbor's noisemaker. Atlas spun in a circle, whining, tail stiff as a rod. Emmett crouched nearby, speaking in soft undertones. It's okay, he murmured. He hesitated, then extended his hand. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you. Atlas hovered, uncertain. Then, in a move that left Emmett's heart pounding with relief, the dog pressed his muzzle lightly against Emmett's hand. A moment later, he jerked back, apparently startled by his own action. But the brief contact had happened. Emmett clenched his eyes shut, quietly offering thanks to whatever cosmic force let them share that fleeting moment of trust. After a few minutes, the dog retreated again. Still, the walls between them had a tiny crack now. Emmett stayed out there until the early hours, listening to the steady hush of the wind and letting Atlas know he wasn't alone. The next morning, Emmett discovered a message on his phone from an unknown number. A single text reading, "You made a mistake, surrender the dog." His pulse pounded. He checked the timestamp, 3:17 a.m. His hand shook with anger. Something about the cowardice of sending an anonymous threat spiked his temper, but fear also curled around his stomach. This was serious, not just idle intimidation. He saved the message, forwarded it to Sheriff Tanner, and tried to carry on with the day. But the tension wouldn't quit. Every time a car passed on the main road, Emmett felt a prickle of worry. He got the sense they were being watched, maybe not constantly, but enough to keep him on edge. That afternoon, he decided to see if physical exercise would help Atlas's stress. He tied a rope toy to a thick tree branch near the barn, letting it dangle at about head height for the dog. Emmett stayed at a distance, calling Atlas's name. Atlas eyed the toy suspiciously at first, as if expecting it to be a trap. Slowly, though, curiosity won out. He tested the rope with gentle bites, then yanked it. Within minutes, he was pulling hard, the branch creaking overhead. A glimmer of genuine canine excitement sparked in Atlas. For a moment, it was as if the dog forgot to be afraid. Emmett couldn't help but grin. He wanted to cheer him on, but held back for fear of startling him. They had only begun to tentatively enjoy this small triumph when a dull roar signaled a vehicle turning onto the gravel road. Emmett's body tensed. He could see a battered SUV heading their way, stirring up dust clouds. The dog also paused, rope dangling from his jaws. One whiff of the engine sound, and Atlas let go, slinking back to Emmett's side for safety. Another small milestone. The dog chose to be near him when alarmed, rather than running away. Emmett didn't recognize the SUV's occupant at first. When the vehicle stopped, a teenage boy hopped out and waved. "Hey, Mr. Vaughn. Name's Jesse Kroger. My uncle is the feed store manager, Dale Kroger." Emmett forced himself to relax. He vaguely recalled meeting the kid once, maybe last year. "Something I can help you with, Jesse?" The boy kicked at a rock. "Uncle Dale said you might have some day labor for me, since you're short-handed out here. I'm saving up for a used dirt bike, so I'm picking up odd jobs." Emmett sighed, tension draining. "Yeah, I could use help clearing the collapsed barn roof. Pays by the hour. You game?" "Sure," Jesse said, brightening. Then he spotted Atlas, who was eyeing him warily from behind Emmett. "Whoa, is that the dog I heard folks talking about?" Emmett's guard rose. "Depends on what you heard." Jesse shrugged. "That you rescued him from the auction. Some folks say he's crazy. Others say you're a fool, but a few are calling you a hero." The word hero sent a jolt of discomfort through Emmett. It was the same label slapped on soldiers returning from conflict. A label that never fit right because it glossed over guilt, regret, and moral ambiguity. "I'm no hero," he muttered, "just trying to do the right thing." Jesse nodded, unbothered by Emmett's response. "He looks intense." Emmett looked back at Atlas. "Yeah, he's been through stuff." He hesitated, then added, "Don't approach him, all right? Just respect his space." "Got it." The teen hoisted a small duffel of work gloves and safety goggles from his SUV. "Where do we start?" Emmett led him toward the old barn, and they began hauling out rotted beams and twisted sheets of corrugated metal. As they worked, the heat grew oppressive, sweat pouring down their necks. Atlas wandered close enough to watch with curiosity, sometimes darting away if a plank clattered too loud. Despite the manual labor, Emmett's mind stayed locked on the bigger threat. That text message. The men who'd visited. The hush of the property felt fragile now, like a curtain that could be torn aside at any moment. Yet, seeing Jesse's youthful enthusiasm, Emmett realized how important it was to maintain a sense of normalcy. The kid needed a harmless summer job, not a front-row seat to a clandestine war over an ex-military dog. "Need me to tie up the dog while we work?" Jesse asked at one point, as if reading Emmett's concerns. Emmett shook his head. "No, he's free. Besides, I think he's safer that way. If trouble shows up, he'll let us know." They pushed through the afternoon, sweat stinging their eyes, backs aching. By the time they called it quits, the barn floor was cleared of major debris. Jesse stared at Atlas from a safe distance, admiration flickering in his expression. "He's a good-looking shepherd for sure." Emmett managed a small smile. "He is. We just have to show him he's not in danger anymore." And hopefully, Emmett thought, show the rest of the world that he wouldn't let them steal or destroy what was finally giving him a sense of purpose. The dog might have come to him broken, but Emmett was determined they'd both emerge stronger than the forces conspiring to tear them down. That night, under a moon so bright it illuminated the ranch's weathered fences, Emmett dreamt of Afghanistan. Dust storms and gunfire, the smell of burning trash, the echoes of wounded men in field hospitals. He startled awake at 3 a.m. to the sound of Atlas whining in the yard, the dog's voice carrying a note of panic. Throwing on jeans, Emmett hurried outside. He found Atlas near the old tractor, hackles raised, chest heaving. but there was no visible threat, just the silver light of the moon. Emmett realized the dog must be fighting his own phantoms, just as Emmett had been moments before. Kneeling a few yards away, Emmett spoke softly, describing a quiet memory from his youth. Fishing at a small creek with his grandfather, how the water ran cold and clear, how they breathed in the pine-scented air. His voice was calm, more for the dog than for himself. Eventually, Atlas settled onto his haunches. Emmett sat cross-legged, yawning, but he stayed with the dog until dawn streaked the sky pink. In the morning, he rose stiffly from his makeshift bed on the porch, where he'd ended up dozing. Atlas lay a short distance away, head on his paws. They exchanged glances that felt almost companionable. With the new day, Emmett found a message in his inbox from Alyssa. She'd received partial records that claimed Atlas was a Tier 1 operational canine, assigned to specialized missions. The paper ended abruptly in redacted lines. Alyssa wrote, "The fact so much is blacked out suggests high-level involvement. Be careful." Emmett stared at the email, heart pounding. Tier 1 meant top-tier special forces. Dogs that worked these missions were invaluable, trained for bomb detection, high-level infiltration, or combat rescue. If Atlas was part of that, no wonder a private contractor might want him. Maybe they had secrets to hide about how they pushed him beyond ethical limits. Later, while rummaging in a storage trunk in the house, Emmett found an old army duffel bag full of gear. Among the random items was a battered dog harness that once belonged to a friend who'd served in a K-9 unit. Emmett ran his fingers over the straps, recalling how that friend, call sign Doc Gentry, talked about forging a bond that transcended language with his assigned dog. Perhaps it was fate that Emmett found himself in a parallel situation, albeit in a civilian capacity. He considered showing the harness to Atlas, but a quiet voice warned him that might be too triggering right now. Instead, he set it aside, one step at a time. That afternoon, as Emmett cleaned out the trunk, he found an old Polaroid from his first deployment. In the snapshot, he stood with 3 fellow medics, all grinning despite the dusty setting. One friend had lost his life on that tour, another was medically discharged. Emmett had survived physically but carried invisible wounds. He rubbed the photo's edge between his fingers. Atlas roamed into the kitchen, drawn by the clink of items. Emmett froze, a surge of surprise. This was the first time Atlas ventured inside while Emmett was awake. The dog sniffed at the old duffel, ears tipping forward, but he quickly backed away, suspicious of the gear's foreign smell. Emmett let him be, rummaging for something that might smell more welcoming. A worn sweatshirt with his own scent. Gently, he placed it near Atlas on the floor. The dog sniffed it, then huffed, unamused, but didn't bolt. Emmett took that as progress. Just as Emmett began to hope for a quiet day, his phone rang, an unknown number. He debated letting it go, but answered. "Vaughn," he said curtly. Silence, then the measured voice of Paul Remington, the same man from Redstone K-9. "You've had time to think. We're prepared to make a substantially larger offer." Emmett gritted his teeth. "I told you, the dog is not for sale." Remington gave a slow exhale. "You do realize we can't let you keep him. It's a matter of contractual clauses beyond your understanding. We have documentation proving the dog was stolen from a facility before it was sold at that auction illegally." "Yeah?" Emmett challenged. "Then show your documentation to the sheriff, because I have legal paperwork for the purchase." Remington's voice took on a harder edge. "We prefer an amicable solution. But if you force us, we'll take official measures." Emmett ended the call, heart pounding, hands slick with sweat. He quickly called Sheriff Tanner, who listened with a growing scowl. "They say they have documentation claiming Atlas was stolen property," Emmett explained. "Bull," Tanner spat. "We'll keep an eye out. If they file in the county, it'll appear in the public record. I'll let you know if I see anything." Emmett thanked him and hung up. Anxiety coiled in his stomach. What if they had forged documents? Or real documents? Would the courts or the local PD side with them? He found Atlas pacing by the door. The dog's body language was edgy, as if sensing Emmett's stress. Emmett reached for his canteen, sipping water to calm himself. "I won't let them take you," he murmured. "I swear." That evening, a thunderstorm rolled in from the north. This time, when the thunder boomed, Emmett found Atlas cowering in a corner of the living room, pressed against the couch. Instead of driving him outside, Emmett quietly closed the front door to dampen the storm's noise and sat in the middle of the floor. "It's just thunder," he said softly, though Atlas's entire body shook. "You're in a house now. You're safe." He began speaking about trivial matters, old stories, bits of memory, letting his voice form a comforting drone. The dog eventually crawled forward, belly low, until he rested near Emmett's leg. The crackle of lightning illuminated the tension in Atlas's face, but he stayed put. Emmett dared to reach out, placing a light hand on Atlas's side. For an instant the dog stiffened, then slowly he relaxed. Minutes later, the power flickered. Emmett sat in near darkness, the sporadic lightning revealing the two silhouettes, man and dog, side by side, refusing to yield to the turmoil raging outside. In that charged moment, Emmett felt a bond seal between them. Not complete trust yet, but the beginnings of it. A raw, honest closeness formed through parallel scars. After the storm subsided, Atlas stood and shook out his fur, as if discarding all that anxiety. He glanced at Emmett, the tip of his tail giving the faintest of wags. Emmett's chest tightened with emotion. This was more than just progress. This was a mutual recognition that neither had to face their pasts alone. If the men from Redstone tried to tear them apart now, they'd soon learn how fiercely Emmett could fight when given a reason named Atlas. Late the following morning, Alyssa arrived in her vet truck, stepping onto the porch with purposeful strides. Emmett opened the door, letting her inside. Atlas retreated to the corner of the living room, watchful but no longer as fearful. Alyssa offered a friendly wave and set her bag down carefully. "I have news," she said in a soft voice, though excitement laced it. "I found an investigative journalist named Miriam Fletcher, who's been tracking suspicious activity by private K9 contractors. She believes Atlas could be a key piece in exposing corruption." Emmett tensed. He had mixed feelings about going public. Corruption? How deep? Deep enough that dogs are allegedly put through extreme training or forced into missions beyond standard protocols. Some are reclassified as failures when they show signs of trauma. Then they vanish. Miriam thinks these contractors bury evidence of wrongdoing by disposing of dogs any way they can, including auctions. Atlas pawed the carpet, as if the tension in the room was seeping into his bones. Alyssa continued, "I invited Miriam to come here, only if you approve. She wants to interview you, see Atlas, and gather info to confirm her suspicions." Emmett swallowed. "If I do that, it'll be like painting a target on my back for those Redstone folks. But if it brings justice, maybe it's worth it." He glanced at Atlas, who was watching them with an intensity that suggested he understood more than anyone realized. Finally, Emmett sighed. "Set it up." Alyssa patted his shoulder, thankful. "She'll be discreet. We'll make sure we're not endangering either of you more than necessary." "Speaking of danger," Emmett added, "I've been getting threats. Sheriff's on alert, but—" She nodded, lips tightening. "I'll mention that to Miriam. She's good at sniffing out intimidation tactics. Don't be surprised if she already has files on Redstone." They turned their attention to Atlas, who had begun to inch closer, sniffing at the medical bag Alyssa carried. Carefully, she knelt, allowing him to approach. Her stethoscope lay on top, not in use yet. She extended a treat in one hand. Atlas hesitated, then accepted it, chewing slowly. "That's it?" Alyssa murmured. "Just a small check, okay?" She kept her motions measured as she gently placed the stethoscope on his flank. Atlas's ears flicked with nervousness, but he let her listen to his heartbeat. Emmett stood close, whispering reassurances. Alyssa nodded in satisfaction. "Heartbeat's strong. He's clearly physically capable. I see some scarring that may indicate bullet or shrapnel wounds. Without x-rays, it's guesswork, but I suspect he was on the front lines." Atlas pulled away when she tried to examine his rear leg. Nonetheless, it was the most thorough checkup to date. "I'll give you some topical ointment for a couple of those older scars to prevent infection," she said to Emmett, "if he'll let you apply it." "I'll try," Emmett replied, eyeing the dog. "Baby steps." Alyssa stood. "Miriam is set to arrive tomorrow. She asked me to be present. That okay?" Emmett paused, then nodded. "Better you're here, just in case." They parted ways and Emmett prepared for the interview. He made sure Atlas had safe spots to retreat to if strangers stressed him out. The next day, by mid-morning, a silver sedan pulled up near the porch. Out stepped a petite woman with close-cropped curly hair, carrying a worn leather satchel and an air of tenacity. "Emmett Vaughn," she greeted. "I'm Miriam Fletcher. Thank you for agreeing to see me." He escorted her inside, meeting Alyssa in the living room. Atlas stood by the hallway, alert. Miriam's keen eyes flicked to him. "That's Atlas, I presume?" Emmett nodded. Miriam set her satchel down, withdrawing a small notepad and voice recorder. "Before we start, I want to assure you this is all confidential, unless or until you give me permission to publish. My main goal is to gather background on Redstone K9 and similar groups. Any information you share about the dog, his condition, or how you obtained him could help me corroborate bigger patterns." Emmett slowly exhaled. "All right, ask away." She began with gentle questions: how Emmett found Atlas at the auction, the nature of the dog's condition, and who had approached Emmett afterward. He mentioned Paul Remington's name and the threats. At that, Miriam leaned forward, scribbling. "Remington," she repeated. "I've heard that name linked to paramilitary-style dog deployments. They're rumored to use severe training regimens. This is big." Alyssa interjected, describing the partial records she'd unearthed indicating Atlas was a high-level operative dog. Miriam seemed especially intrigued by the heavy redactions. "I'll see if I can secure more details. Sometimes public pressure works wonders on bureaucrats who cling to secrecy." When it came time to talk about Atlas's behavior, Emmett was candid about the dog's fear responses, nightmares, and gradual signs of trust. Miriam pressed for more. "Would you say his aggression is fear-based, or do you sense any leftover training pushing him to aggression?" Emmett glanced at Atlas, who was lying near the couch, ears half lowered. "At first, maybe both, but now it's mostly fear. He's protective, though. If he senses a threat, I can tell he's ready to defend. I suspect that's his leftover training, to guard his partner at all costs." Miriam's gaze softened. "So by all accounts, he's a loyal dog who's been abused and abandoned by the very system that trained him. A soldier left to fend for himself. That's exactly what I've been seeing in other cases, though not many come to light." They took a short break so Emmett could refill drinks. Miriam quietly inched closer to Atlas, posture low. She extended her hand. The dog sniffed, then let out a low huff, moving away. She didn't push it. Instead, she snapped a couple of photos from a respectful distance. "You want a picture?" Emmett asked, feeling protective. "I'm not sure I'm ready to publicize him." Miriam tucked her camera away. "I understand. These pictures are for my reference only, not for publication yet. I need them to cross-check any identifying marks with older images of dogs in training programs. If he matches an official ID, it could bolster your case." He rubbed a hand across his face, bone-tired. "Case for what, exactly?" She considered him carefully. "Case for pressing cruelty charges, or forcing a full federal investigation into Redstone. Also, it's a case for you to keep him without further harassment. Once it's proven that Atlas was illegally disposed of, any legitimate ownership claims they make could crumble." A swirl of relief and anxiety welled in Emmett. If exposing the truth would allow him to keep Atlas safely, he was all in. But it also meant stepping further into a confrontation with powerful, well-funded people. Miriam finished her notes, then stood. "I appreciate your honesty. I won't use your story publicly unless you decide. For now, I'll try to connect the dots behind the scenes. If I get a lead, I'll let you know. But watch your back. These companies don't like negative attention." After she left, the house felt small and quiet. Alyssa laid a hand on Emmett's shoulder. "You did the right thing, you know." He nodded, glancing at Atlas. "I hope so." That evening, Emmett took extra care applying the ointment Alyssa had prescribed to one of Atlas's scars, the one on his flank that looked raw. To his surprise, Atlas not only tolerated it, he actually leaned into Emmett's touch, as if the gentle pressure soothed him. It was an intimate moment of trust that, in Emmett's mind, symbolized everything they stood to lose if Redstone regained control. He thought back to the interview. If there was a path to freedom and safety for Atlas, it lay in shining light on what was done in the dark. For the first time in a long while, Emmett felt a sense of righteous purpose. He knew conflict was coming, but maybe, if they played their cards right, it would end with Atlas truly free, and with Emmett free of the guilt he'd carried like an anvil for years. Still, as the night wore on, he couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was brewing, one that might test both man and dog to the core. As weeks passed, the local rumor mill churned with whispers about Emmett's dog. Some folks called Atlas a ticking time bomb. Others, especially the older veterans in town who remembered Emmett as a quiet, respectful kid, voiced admiration. They said it took guts to stand by an animal so clearly haunted. Meanwhile, Jesse Kroger continued helping with chores. Emmett noticed the teen had a gentle approach with Atlas, never intruding, always speaking calmly. On a warm August afternoon, Jesse was stacking lumber near the barn when he called over, "Hey, Mr. Vaughn, he's watching me." Emmett looked up from where he was cleaning a fence post. Sure enough, Atlas had wandered close to Jesse, sniffing the boards. The dog no longer reacted with immediate suspicion to the teen's presence. Jesse slowly extended a closed fist. Atlas sniffed, then stepped back. No aggression. It might have seemed a tiny thing, but Emmett recognized it as another sign the dog was reintegrating. Perhaps with enough time, Atlas could become part of the community, safe and accepted. But not everyone embraced that idea. One evening, just after dusk, Emmett heard gunshots in the distance. He bolted outside, scanning the horizon. Atlas bristled, growling, but the shots were too far to see any muzzle flash. Over the next few days, more random gunfire echoed around the perimeter of the ranch late at night, never striking anything on Emmett's property, but close enough to rattle nerves. Sheriff Tanner drove out, checking for footprints or casings. "It's private land back there," he said grimly, pointing to a neglected expanse abutting Emmett's boundary. "Some folks hunt coyotes or rabbits. Could be kids messing around, or it might be intimidation from your new enemies." "Either way," Emmett replied, "I'm sleeping even lighter than usual." Tanner nodded. "I'll keep a deputy swinging by on random nights." As the tension escalated, Dr. Rafael Moreno, the veterinarian advocate, arrived with Alyssa one afternoon. He carried a manila envelope. Inside were copies of an official complaint filed with the local Humane Society, naming unknown parties who had allegedly abused Atlas. Also included was a sworn statement from Emmett that Atlas had shown signs of advanced training and scarring consistent with cruelty. "Best case scenario," Raphael explained, "this creates legal friction for Redstone. If they try to claim ownership, the burden is on them to prove they didn't abuse him." Emmett set the documents aside. "And in the worst case?" Raphael exhaled. "We go to court. Could be months or years, but I think we can hold them off." Alyssa squeezed Emmett's shoulder. "At least you have protection now. They can't just show up and seize him." That small victory felt overshadowed by the sense that Redstone wouldn't just walk away. Emmett kept his shotgun handy at night, not because he wanted a confrontation, but because he wasn't naive about what fear and greed could provoke in certain people. A week later, Miriam Fletcher returned with new developments. Meeting in Emmett's living room again, she spread out printed photos across the coffee table. One caught Emmett's eye immediately. A younger-looking Atlas in a training yard, wearing a tactical vest that bore the Redstone logo. Standing next to him was none other than Paul Remington. "That's him, right?" Miriam asked, tapping the figure in the photo. Emmett nodded, pulse quickening. The picture showed Atlas in prime condition, coat glossy, posture proud. Remington held a short leash, smirking at the camera. Guess that's all the proof we need that they used him in their program. Miriam shuffled more images. I have multiple testimonies from ex-trainers who claim Redstone implemented harsh conditioning. Electric prods, withheld food, forced marches in desert heat, stuff way beyond standard protocols. They say some dogs broke under the strain. Those were either destroyed or dumped. Others, like Atlas, displayed aggression or erratic behavior. Redstone quietly rehomed them, often at shady auctions. Emmett felt a surge of sick anger. And no one's held them accountable? Miriam's expression tightened. They hide behind corporate shells, disclaimers about national security. But if we can show a pattern of cruelty, we can bring the Department of Agriculture or the Department of Justice into it. Alyssa looked at Emmett. We should share these with Sheriff Tanner at least. Yeah, he agreed, voice taut. We do it first thing tomorrow. As if the moment couldn't be more fraught, they heard a vehicle crunching the gravel outside. Emmett tensed. Miriam reflexively collected her photos, sliding them into a folder. Atlas let out a low rumble, standing by the door with his head held high. Peeking through the window, Emmett saw a black SUV. Two men got out, both armed with sidearms strapped visibly to their hips. Emmett's stomach flipped. This was far more brazen than the earlier approach. He turned to the others, speaking low. Lock the door. Call the sheriff. He stepped onto the porch, shutting the door behind him. Heart thudding, he faced the men from a safe distance. Can I help you? One man, stocky with a shaved head, gave a cold grin. Mr. Vaughn, we're here to retrieve some property, a dog. Our boss grows tired of your stalling. Emmett's pulse hammered. You're trespassing. Leave now. The second man, taller, pointed a finger at the house. Your buddy in there, the reporter, is stirring up trouble. That stops. Emmett forced his voice steady. If you think intimidation works, you picked the wrong house. The sheriff's on his way. At that moment, Atlas appeared behind Emmett, lips curled in a silent snarl. His tail was stiff, posture readied. The men eyed the dog. Despite the tension, Emmett felt a flicker of pride. This was an animal who'd once cowered in corners. Now he stood ready to defend Emmett's side. The men seemed unsure, scanning the yard. Then the stocky one hissed, "We'll be back," and jerked his head. They retreated to their SUV. In a flurry of dust and gravel, they sped away. A wave of relief and fury swept over Emmett. He let out a shaky breath. Miriam stepped onto the porch, phone in hand. Sheriff's dispatch said they're en route. Emmett exhaled sharply. Gone now, but that was a clear message. Sure enough, when the sheriff arrived, they could do little but file a report for trespassing and harassment. No license plates or direct threats, just more intimidation. Tanner took notes, his jaw clenched. This is escalated, the sheriff said. We'll do drive-bys daily. But if these guys want to break the law, we're a small department. My advice? Maybe you want to relocate the dog somewhere safer until we handle them. Emmett gazed at Atlas, who was pacing by the fence, sniffing the air. He's not going anywhere without me. This is his home now. Tanner tipped his hat. Then let's hope they back down before someone does something foolish. As night fell, Emmett doubled down on security. He rigged motion sensor lights around the property, checked every lock, made sure phone lines were working. Atlas roamed the perimeter, occasionally letting out a low bark. Emmett felt a pang in his chest. This dog had seen enough battlefields for a lifetime, yet here he was, stuck in another standoff. Inside, Miriam quietly handed Emmett an envelope. These are statements from two of their ex-trainers. If anything happens to me, or if you need leverage, use them. And please be careful. He appreciated her concern, though it weighed heavily on his conscience that others were now in the crosshairs. Thank you. I'll keep them safe. That night, while checking the yard for the last time, Emmett found Atlas standing at the edge of the fence, staring out at the empty road. The dog's ears were pricked, scanning for any sign of the SUV. Emmett approached, resting a hand gently on the dog's back. Atlas turned his head slightly, acknowledging him. They stood there together for a long time, man and dog, two souls shaped by the cruelty of men with too much power. And though the darkness around them was thick, Emmett felt the unstoppable strength of loyalty that now bound them. Days merged into tense nights, each passing hour leaving Emmett more exhausted. He slept in fragments, constantly awakened by the slightest noise. Yet Atlas's presence kept him going. Each morning, the dog would come check on him with quiet vigilance, as if ensuring Emmett was still there. One evening, Emmett dozed on the couch, lulled by the hum of a nearby fan. Atlas rested on the floor, muzzle between his paws, seemingly calm. Suddenly, the motion sensor light in the yard blazed on. Atlas sprang up, a guttural snarl rolling in his throat. Emmett jolted awake, heart drumming. Grabbing a flashlight and his shotgun, Emmett peered outside. The silhouette of a man near the barn flickered across the yard. Fear lanced through him. Was it one of the Redstone goons? "Stay here," he whispered to Atlas, but the dog pressed to his side, refusing to be left behind. Emmett decided not to waste time fighting it. They crept out onto the porch. "Hey!" Emmett called, voice echoing in the darkness. "You on my property? Identify yourself." The figure pivoted, aimed something that glinted in the floodlight. Emmett ducked, heart pounding. A bullet slammed into the porch post. Without hesitation, Atlas lunged off the steps, racing toward the man. Emmett shouted for him to come back, but the dog's training kicked in, fueled by adrenaline. A second shot rang out, missing Atlas by inches. The dog closed the distance with terrifying speed. The intruder cursed, stumbling back. Emmett sprinted after them, shotgun raised. The would-be attacker realized he was outmatched by both the enraged shepherd and an armed homeowner, and bolted, firing a wild shot into the air before disappearing into the gloom beyond the barn. Emmett called Atlas, heart in his throat, praying the dog wasn't hit. Atlas returned, panting heavily, eyes shining with adrenaline. Emmett dropped to a knee, running a frantic hand over the dog's fur, checking for blood or wounds. Remarkably, Atlas seemed unscathed. Moments later, headlights blazed up the driveway, Sheriff Tanner and a deputy. They found Emmett hunched on the porch, shotgun across his lap, Atlas at his side, both breathing raggedly. Tanner surveyed the bullet holes. "Damn," he muttered. "Any idea who it was?" Emmett's hands shook. "Didn't see his face. It happened fast." The deputy canvassed the area, but found only shell casings near the barn and footprints in the dirt heading toward the main road. No car was parked within sight. The sheriff hammered out a short report, grumbling in frustration about how these intruders kept evading a direct confrontation with law enforcement. When they left, Emmett spent the rest of the night wide-eyed, every nerve on alert. Atlas lay at his feet, equally unsettled. In the darkness, Emmett gently rubbed the dog's ears. "You saved me," he whispered, again. The next morning, as the sun rose on a battered porch and bullet-scarred barn, Emmett's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You won't be lucky next time. Hand over the dog." He stared at it, fury boiling. They had tried violence, and they would try again. He had to protect Atlas, not just physically but legally, and possibly do so somewhere safer. Yet the thought of running felt wrong. Standing your ground was something the army had taught him. But an uneasy voice inside whispered that if he stayed, someone might die. He called Alyssa, voice quivering with anger. "They fired shots at me last night. They want me to give up Atlas." Her sharp intake of breath crackled through the phone. "My God, Emmett, you can't keep living like this. Can we move Atlas to a secure facility? I know a rescue ranch out of state." Emmett's chest tightened. "He's come too far to be dumped somewhere else. He trusts me now. If I vanish from his life, it'll reinforce his worst fears, that everyone abandons him." Alyssa understood the ethical predicament, but insisted, "We have to do something. If not relocating, then maybe constant protective detail. That might not be feasible in our small town." He sighed, glancing at the newly patched bullet hole in the porch post. "I'll talk to Miriam. Maybe it's time to blow the lid on this publicly. That might force Redstone's hand, or at least make them back off if the media's watching." Alyssa agreed, promising to rally whoever she could for moral or legal support. Emmett hung up, turning to find Atlas standing behind him as if expecting orders. Instead, Emmett dropped to a seat on the porch, burying his face in his hands. The dog approached, pressing his nose against Emmett's shoulder in a startling display of empathy. Emmett's throat tightened with unexpected tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I just want you safe." That day, Emmett called Miriam, telling her about the shooting and the new threats. She listened intently, then declared, "I'm running the story. I'll do it carefully. No revealing your exact location, but with enough detail to implicate Redstone. People need to know." Emmett exhaled a shaky breath. This was the nuclear option, stirring a hornet's nest. "All right, let's do it." By nightfall, she'd emailed him a draft article. Reading it made his pulse pound. The piece, titled "Discarded Warriors: One Dog's Story of Betrayal by a Private Security Giant," laid out Atlas's background, describing evidence of Redstone's training abuses and attempts at intimidation. Miriam had quotes from ex-trainers, along with references to the bullet holes in Emmett's property. She avoided naming Emmett directly, calling him only a local veteran caretaker. Emmett realized the story, once published, might go viral. The local news might pick it up, and from there, regional or even national outlets. Redstone would be cornered. They could either attempt a legal takedown of the article or ramp up their intimidation. Or, possibly, they would fold and distance themselves from the entire scandal. He prayed for the latter. He gave Miriam the green light. She promised the piece would go up the next morning on a well-read investigative news site. That evening, Emmett could do little but pace the house, phone in hand, waiting for possible fallout. Atlas sensed the tension, trailing him from room to room. Eventually, Emmett forced himself to stop and kneel beside the dog, pressing his forehead gently to Atlas's. The dog's ears flicked, but he didn't pull away. "We're in this together," Emmett murmured. "I won't let them hurt you." Thunder growled on the horizon, another storm rolling in. The lights flickered. Emmett sank onto the floor, leaning his back against the couch. Atlas lay next to him, head resting on Emmett's thigh. The quiet contact was the closest they'd ever been. Emmett's hand found the dog's scarred flank, stroking softly, feeling the steady rhythm of Atlas's breathing. All the heartbreak, fear, and rage coalesced into one vow. If tomorrow's revelations led to a final confrontation, Emmett would stand firm. Because this dog was no mere asset or property. Atlas was a living being who deserved a life free from torture and betrayal, and so did Emmett. Lightning flashed, thunder shook the windows, but they remained there, patient, resolved, ready for whatever came next. Morning arrived with swirling wind and storm clouds, matching Emmett's mood. The article went live at 7 a.m. within a niche investigative news community. By 9 a.m., it was shared on social media by animal welfare organizations, picking up traction. Comments flooded in, outraged at the idea of a heroic military dog being discarded. Miriam sent a brief text, "It's blowing up, stay safe." Emmett tried to keep busy, patching fence posts. He periodically checked his phone for new threats, but by noon, nothing. Maybe Redstone was reeling from the blow. Jesse popped by to finish barn repairs, telling Emmett about chatter at the feed store. "Everyone's calling your dog a hero," the teen said, eyes bright. "They want to help." Emmett's throat grew tight. The idea that the community stood behind him gave him hope, but he couldn't forget the reality. Men with guns had attacked him just days ago. Around mid-afternoon, a black SUV roared up the driveway again. Heart hammering, Emmett signaled for Jesse to run inside the house and lock the door. Atlas rushed to Emmett's side, hackles up. Emmett held a trembling hand near the dog's neck, trying to project calm. The SUV screeched to a stop. Out stepped Paul Remington, face contorted in fury. Behind him, Another man cradled what looked like an assault rifle. Remington strode forward, jabbing a finger at Emmett. "You son of a... I hope you're proud of yourself. That article is defamation. You're done." His voice shook with rage. Emmett swallowed, forcing steel into his tone. "The article is the truth. People see what you did to these dogs." Remington clenched his fists. "You can't win. Even if your little sob story gets sympathy, we have lawyers, politicians. We'll bury you in court, or bury you literally." He snarled under his breath. Atlas let out a snarl that sent goosebumps up Emmett's arms. "Leave," Emmett warned, voice low. "We're protected now, and so is Atlas." Remington's associate raised the rifle slightly, a chilling gesture. Emmett froze, adrenaline dumping into his veins. If the man opened fire, they had no cover except the old barn. But in a snap decision, Emmett refused to back down. He stepped forward, placing his body partially in front of Atlas. The dog advanced, teeth bared but still heeding Emmett's presence. Remington flinched, maybe realizing how precarious the situation was. Shots fired in broad daylight, especially after the article's publication, would be too public, too damning. The man's mouth twisted. "We're not leaving empty-handed." At that moment, another vehicle rumbled into the driveway. The sheriff's cruiser, followed by a second patrol car. Sheriff Tanner stepped out, hand on his holstered weapon. "Afternoon, folks. Heard about some possible disturbance here." Remington's expression turned venomous. He signaled to his armed partner, who lowered the rifle, stepping back to the SUV. Tanner approached, posture unwavering. "Mr. Remington, you're trespassing on private property. Put your hands where I can see them." For a tense few seconds, it was a standoff. Then, Remington sneered and complied, raising his hands. "We were invited," he lied. "I didn't invite them," Emmett said coldly. "They threatened me." Tanner radioed for backup, ordering the second patrol officer to secure the rifle from the SUV. Remington spat on the ground, glaring at Emmett. "This dog belongs to Redstone. You have no idea who you're up against." "I know enough," Emmett retorted. "Now get off my land." Between the sheriff's presence and the fear of immediate repercussions, Remington withdrew. The armed partner retrieved the rifle from the officer grudgingly, stowing it away under the deputy's watchful glare. Tanner took down their details, warning them not to set foot on the property again. Remington had enough sense not to escalate in front of multiple cops. They left with a squeal of tires, threats unspoken but tangible. Emmett's legs nearly buckled as the adrenaline wore off. Tanner gave him a firm look. "I'll keep a 24-hour watch on your place for the next few days. But those men are serious. I recommend you consider relocating the dog, or yourself, until they back down." Emmett exhaled a trembling breath, glancing down at Atlas. The dog's sides still heaved, eyes locked on the SUV's dust trail. "Sheriff," Emmett said, voice thick, "we're not running. They need to know we won't cave." Tanner's gaze held a mixture of respect and worry. "Your call, but be careful. They're not above the law, but they sure act like it." When the police left, Jesse emerged from the house, wide-eyed. "That was intense, Mr. Vaughn. You and Atlas okay?" Emmett mustered a shaky nod. "Yeah, we're fine. Thanks for getting inside." Atlas stepped forward, pressing his nose against Emmett's hand as if checking him over. Emmett knelt, ruffling the dog's fur. "You did good," he whispered. "You didn't attack unless needed. That's incredible restraint, buddy." He realized he was praising the dog for what was basically battlefield discipline. The parallels to their shared military experiences felt unavoidable. But there was something else. Trust. Atlas had chosen to stand with Emmett, not break into uncontrollable aggression. They were truly a team now. Emmett looked up to see Jesse watching the bond between them. The teen's gaze brimmed with admiration. "He's different than he was at first, huh?" "Yeah," Emmett said quietly. "He's healing." That evening, the local news station picked up Miriam's story. They broadcast the gist. A possibly illegal private training program. A dog rescued at auction. Intimidation from men in black SUVs. The coverage was sensational, but it spread the message further. Emmett fielded calls from several strangers offering donations to support the dog's care or legal defense. He was overwhelmed by the compassion. Late into the night, he and Alyssa spoke on the phone, discussing the possibility that Redstone might sever ties with Remington if the scandal grew big enough. Or maybe they'd double down. No one knew for sure. When Emmett finally turned in, Atlas lay at the foot of the couch. The wind had died down, leaving an almost eerie calm. For once, Emmett's nightmares didn't revolve around faraway combat zones. Instead, he dreamed of Atlas pinned under swirling black water, with faceless men trying to drag him away. Emmett woke in a sweat, heart racing. But in the faint moonlight, he saw Atlas curled near him, chest rising and falling in gentle sleep. Emmett felt tears prick his eyes, tears of fierce protectiveness. He'd go to the ends of the earth for this dog if he had to. And maybe, just maybe, that unwavering loyalty would be enough to save them both. Tensions continued running high. A patchwork of supportive neighbors, curious onlookers, and official law enforcement calls turned Emmett's ranch into a local spectacle. People drove by slowly, trying to catch a glimpse of the rescue dog. Some shouted encouragement from their car windows, others dropped off homemade meals. A group of local veterans even proposed standing night watch shifts to dissuade further attacks. Emmett was humbled by the show of solidarity, though it was an uncomfortable spotlight. He'd always been private about his military past. Now the entire region knew about his stand against Redstone. If the situation wasn't so dangerous, it might feel almost uplifting. On a gray afternoon, while Emmett and Jesse were reinforcing the barn door, Alyssa pulled up in her truck, face tight with urgency. She carried her veterinary bag inside, motioning Emmett to follow. Once in the living room, she blurted, "We need to sedate Atlas for an X-ray. There might be embedded shrapnel or a device in him." Emmett's eyes widened. "What do you mean, a device?" She explained that Miriam had uncovered a rumored tactic used by some rogue operators, implanting small tracking or shock devices under the skin of K9S. If it's there, it could explain how Redstone's men always track him. "We have to check, Emmett. Let me do the X-ray in my mobile unit." Fear and anger mingled in Emmett's gut. "He hates medical stuff, Alyssa. It'll traumatize him." She placed a hand on his arm. "I promise I'll be as gentle as possible. I brought mild sedatives that won't knock him out fully, just enough to keep him calm." Reluctantly, Emmett agreed, trusting her intentions. He crouched by Atlas, who was lying near the kitchen door, giving the dog a gentle scratch behind the ears. "We need to check you for something, buddy. It might sting a little." Atlas eyed him, tail flicking nervously. Emmett led him to Alyssa's mobile clinic, a specially outfitted van where she had X-ray equipment. With Emmett's help, she administered a low dose of sedative. Atlas started to sway, blinking slowly. They guided him onto a padded table. Emmett stroked the dog's fur, murmuring comfort while Alyssa carefully aligned the X-ray apparatus. The machine clicked and whirred, capturing images from several angles. Emmett's stomach twisted at the dog's whine. This was the first time Atlas had allowed so much contact and handling without an aggressive response. The sedation helped, yes, but the fact that Atlas didn't snap even as fear glimmered in his eyes spoke volumes about his trust in Emmett. When Alyssa developed the images digitally, her face paled. She pointed at a tiny metallic object visible near Atlas's neck. "There's something right here." The room felt colder. Emmett hovered beside her, jaw clenched. "Is it a chip? A bullet fragment?" "Not sure," she admitted. "Could be a specialized microchip used for tracking. Possibly more advanced than standard ID chips. I need to remove it to know for sure." Emmett stared at the screen in horror. That might be how Redstone's men always managed to show up. The uneasy feeling that they were being watched or monitored suddenly made sense. Time was critical. The sedatives wouldn't keep Atlas docile for long. With Emmett assisting, Alyssa performed a small incision near the dog's neck, rummaging with careful forceps. Atlas let out a low moan, and tears pricked Emmett's eyes, though he kept stroking the dog's head. "Got it," Alyssa breathed. She extracted a tiny metal capsule. It looked high-tech, with an etched surface that certainly wasn't a normal ID chip. She placed it in a sterile bag, a triumphant but grim expression on her face. "I'll have a friend examine this. We'll see what data it contains." They carefully cleaned and stitched the incision. When Atlas finally came to, he was groggy, whining softly. Emmett sat on the floor, letting the dog's head rest in his lap. "It's out," he whispered. "They can't track you like that anymore." Atlas blinked, muzzle parted in shallow breaths, still under sedation's fog. Emmett felt an almost paternal protectiveness. This dog had been violated at every turn. He deserved better. Alyssa explained aftercare, leaving them with antibiotic cream and instructions to keep the area clean. They carried Atlas back into the house, where he could rest. Emmett laid him gently on a folded blanket in the living room. For hours, Emmett stayed beside him, occasionally feeding small bits of water with a sponge to keep the dog hydrated. Jesse hovered in the doorway, wide-eyed at the revelation. "They were tracking him all along?" he murmured. "That's messed up." Emmett nodded. "They'll be furious once they realize we removed it. They'll come at us another way." Night descended. Emmett found himself exhausted yet unable to sleep, paranoid about retribution. He sat by the couch, softly speaking to Atlas, who dozed on and off. Thunder rumbled outside again, but the dog was too groggy to react with fear. Sometime after midnight, a text came from Miriam. "Heard from Alyssa about the chip. This is huge. My sources confirm Redstone uses prototypes not cleared by the FDA. This is evidence of illegal activity. If we can tie them to that device, it's over." Emmett stared at the phone, hope mingling with dread. If we can tie them to it. That phrase repeated in his mind. Redstone had resources to spin anything. Yet if law enforcement seized the device, ran forensic analysis, and found Redstone's internal frequencies or labeling, it might blow the entire scandal open. As if reading his thoughts, Atlas stirred, opening bleary eyes. Emmett's chest tightened with affection. "We're close," he whispered, "to making sure you never have to run or fight again." Atlas blinked, resting his head against Emmett's hand. The weight of the dog's trust buoyed Emmett's resolve. He wasn't just fighting for a dog. He was fighting for the principle that no being, human or canine, should be tossed aside by a corrupt system. Outside, the wind howled and lightning illuminated the yard. Emmett felt his pulse quicken. A storm is coming, he thought, but this time, we're ready. 2 days after removing the chip, Alyssa's contact confirmed it was indeed a sophisticated tracking device. He also found partial data logs referencing a Project Harpoon, a Redstone-driven experiment in advanced canine modification. Miriam wasted no time, sharing the breakthrough with her editors and law enforcement sources. Sheriff Tanner, flanked by 2 state troopers, visited Emmett to examine the device. They took official custody of it as evidence. The sheriff's expression was grimly satisfied. "This might be the final nail," he said. "We'll get a forensic tech to confirm it's Redstone property. Then there's no denying their wrongdoing." Yet that same night, Emmett's phone buzzed with an unknown call. A tense voice on the other end stated, "You have something that belongs to us. Return it or the dog dies." Emmett's knuckles went white on the phone. "It's already with the authorities," he lied smoothly. "You come near my property again, you'll face more than local cops. There's a federal investigation." A growl from the caller, then a click. Emmett's heart hammered. He quickly dialed Tanner to warn him. The sheriff promised to escalate patrols yet again, urging Emmett to be on his guard. Emmett was bone-tired, but a spark of defiance flared in him. So far, Redstone's intimidation hinged on secrecy and fear. Now the world knew about their unethical operations. As soon as forensic analysis pinned the chip to them, the legal avalanche would bury them. The next afternoon, dark clouds loomed once more. A sense of impending conflict hung in the air. Emmett sat on the porch with Atlas. The dog's neck had healed enough that he no longer wore a bandage, though Emmett applied salve daily. The two watched lightning flicker in the distance. Emmett quietly said, "No matter what happens next, I want you to know. You're free, and I'm honored to stand beside you." It felt odd, speaking to an animal that way, but the unwavering gaze Atlas gave in return seemed to confirm he understood on some level. The dog leaned in, letting Emmett scratch behind his ears. It was a gentle, almost serene moment, until headlights cut through the gloom. Tires crunched on gravel. A sleek black SUV and two more vehicles approached. Emmett cursed, hand tightening on the porch railing. "We can't catch a break." Atlas rose, letting out a low, resonant growl. Emmett signaled him to stay. He recognized the lead SUV as the same one from the prior confrontation. Out stepped multiple men, including Paul Remington, looking disheveled, face twisted with desperation. The other men fanned out. At least two carried visible firearms. Emmett quickly retreated into the house, calling the sheriff with a rapid explanation. "They're here in force," he breathed. Remington's voice boomed from outside. "Enough games, Vaughn. Send out the dog." Atlas crouched near Emmett, eyes flicking to the windows. Emmett grabbed his shotgun. They were pinned inside. The locked door wouldn't hold if they really pushed, but the sheriff was at least 15 minutes away. A standoff. Emmett's pulse raced, but he forced calm. "We hold them off until help arrives." Remington barked orders at his men, telling them to surround the house. One tried the back door, rattling it. Another hovered by the front, brandishing a rifle. The scene felt like a siege. Emmett considered returning fire but worried about the legal ramifications of shooting first, plus risking stray bullets with Jesse possibly in the barn or neighbors in the distance. Then a voice came from outside, loud and authoritative. "This is Sheriff Tanner. Lower your weapons." Emmett peered out the side window. Tanner's cruiser and two additional patrol cars had arrived faster than expected, lights flashing. Another vehicle, unmarked, likely state or federal, followed. Officers emerged, guns drawn, ordering Remington's men to stand down. Remington's face twisted in rage. He hesitated, clearly weighing whether to go out in a blaze of defiance. But seeing the swarm of armed law enforcement, he slowly raised his hands. His men exchanged panicked glances and followed suit. For the first time, Emmett breathed in relief. Atlas, peering through the window, let out a soft bark, as if celebrating the advantage. Law enforcement spent the next hour corralling and disarming the intruders. Emmett eventually stepped outside, shotgun carefully lowered, to meet Sheriff Tanner and the newly arrived federal agents. One agent, a woman in plain clothes, introduced herself as Agent Kelly from the Department of Justice. She explained they had expedited an arrest warrant after receiving Miriam's evidence, along with the chip data. Redstone K9's board was under investigation. Remington and his cronies had apparently decided on a last-ditch attempt at forcibly reclaiming Atlas before the law clamped down. Agent Kelly shook Emmett's hand. "Thank you for standing firm. Your dog's story and the device you uncovered were critical to obtaining these warrants. We'll be shutting down multiple Redstone facilities across the region." Emmett glanced at Remington, who was being led to a patrol car in handcuffs. The man glared at Emmett with undisguised hatred, but there was resignation in his eyes too. He had lost. For the first time, Emmett felt the tension in his gut loosen. They were safe. Tanner clapped Emmett on the shoulder. "You okay? That was close. If we'd arrived 2 minutes later..." Emmett swallowed hard, nodding. He turned to see Atlas pacing near the corner of the porch, uncertain. Emmett whistled softly, beckoning him. The dog trotted over, ignoring the swirl of officers in the yard. He pressed his nose against Emmett's side as though asking if the danger was truly over. Emmett sank to one knee, wrapping an arm gently around Atlas's neck. "We're good," he murmured, "all thanks to you and everyone who believed in us." In the following days, the aftermath unfurled rapidly. News outlets broadcast the story of Redstone's downfall. Executives scrambled to issue public statements. Animal welfare groups praised Emmett's courage, calling Atlas the dog who wouldn't be silenced. Neighbors visited with cookies, pies, even dog toys, forming an ad hoc celebration of the victory. Sheriff Tanner helped formalize Atlas's adoption, ensuring no one could ever lay claim to him again. Alyssa performed one last thorough exam, concluding that while Atlas bore physical and psychological scars, he was on the path to a full, healthy life. When Miriam returned to finalize interviews, she was beaming. "Your story is going nationwide," she told Emmett and Alyssa. "People are rallying for better protections for ex-military dogs. Legislation might get introduced." Emmett smiled, glancing at Atlas lying contentedly in a patch of sun by the porch. "He's changing more than just his own fate," Emmett said softly. "He's changing how we treat these animals." A final surge of pride warmed him. Once, he had believed he was powerless to fix anything, haunted by regrets from his time as a medic. But in saving Atlas, he'd also found a measure of redemption for himself. He discovered he could fight a righteous fight again, stand up for someone who needed him, and win. That evening, with the sky turning a vivid gold, Emmett stood on his porch with a mug of coffee. Atlas lay at his feet, muzzle relaxed on his paws. Jesse lounged in a chair, recounting the day's headlines from social media, sounding more excited than ever. The farmland swayed in a gentle breeze, the barn repairs nearly complete. For the first time in months, Emmett felt true peace. He crouched next to Atlas, scratching under the dog's chin. "So, buddy," he said with a lopsided grin, "ready for a quiet life of chasing rabbits and lying in the sun?" Atlas offered a small tail wag, as if to say, "Absolutely." A phone buzzed with a message from Alyssa, reading simply, "The war is over. Welcome home, both of you." Emmett blinked back tears. She was right. They were home in a way neither had known before, free from old ghosts, from betrayal, and from the violence that once defined them. Atlas pressed his head against Emmett's knee, eyes half closed in contentment. Emmett stroked his fur gently, gazing out over the sweeping fields. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, ongoing legal processes, testimonies, calls from reporters. But for now, in the soft hush of dusk, man and dog had found their victory. And in that victory, they discovered something neither had believed possible when their paths first crossed at that lonely auction ring: healing, belonging, and the promise of a future where wounds could finally mend. Under the last rays of the setting sun, Emmett and Atlas share a silent bond that speaks louder than any words. No longer haunted by their respective pasts, they step forward into a community that embraces them both. In protecting and healing each other, they have forged an unbreakable connection, one that extends hope to everyone who has ever felt discarded or broken by life's harshest trials. Through their journey, they prove that when courage meets compassion, even the deepest scars can find a path to renewal.